The Ferrari dealership showroom in Beverly Hills gleamed under crystal chandeliers when Marcus Wellington, real estate billionaire, decided to publicly humiliate a homeless girl who was watching the cars through the window. The 10-year-old child, dressed in tattered clothes and barefoot, had timidly entered the luxurious showroom following a stray kitten. Marcus, surrounded by investors and journalists for the launch of the new Ferrari 488 Pista, saw the perfect opportunity for a power demonstration in front of the cameras. He yelled at the little beggar to look at that red Ferrari worth $3 million, promising her the car if she could start it. The crowd erupted in cruel laughter, while the girl, named Sophie, looked at him with eyes that had seen too much pain for her age. What nobody knew was that Sophie hid a devastating secret. She was the daughter of Tony Mitchell, the former Ferrari engineering genius who died in an accident 3 years earlier. When she approached the car with absolute confidence and whispered to the engine like an old friend, the roar that followed silenced every laugh and made Marcus pale. The girl hadn't just started the Ferrari, she had just destroyed the arrogance of a man who believed money was everything. The Ferrari dealership on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills represented the temple of speed and American luxury. That Tuesday afternoon in November, the main showroom sparkled under spotlights, illuminating a collection of supercars worth over $20 million. The occasion was the launch of the new Ferrari 488 Pista Limited Edition, with only 50 examples existing worldwide. Marcus Wellington, 45 years old, with a fortune estimated at $2 billion thanks to his real estate empire, was the star of the event. Tall, elegant in his $5,000 Armani suit, he had organized this presentation to show the world how rich and powerful he was. Journalists, international investors, and collectors wandered among the vehicles, sipping Dom Perignon champagne and admiring the excellence of Italian engineering. Marcus enjoyed the attention, posing for photographers next to the gleaming red Ferrari. He was the type of man who measured his worth by the zeros in his bank account and the respect that money bought him. He had built his fortune by demolishing historic neighborhoods to build luxury skyscrapers, never caring about the families who lost their homes. But while everyone admired the cars, nobody noticed the small figure hiding behind the entrance window. Sophie, barely 10 years old, watched everything from outside with eyes wide with wonder and hunger. The girl had been homeless for 3 years since an accident had taken away her parents. She lived on the streets, sleeping in makeshift shelters, eating whatever she could find. Her clothes were worn and patched, her blonde hair tangled and dirty, her feet bare and hardened by the cold Los Angeles pavement. But there was something about Sophie that went beyond the appearance of a simple homeless child. Her green eyes sparkled with sharp intelligence and hid knowledge that no one would have suspected. Tony Mitchell had been one of Ferrari's most brilliant engineers until 3 years earlier, a mechanical genius who had dedicated his life to perfecting the engines that made the whole world dream. Sophie had grown up in her father's workshop, learning the secrets of engines before she could even read. Tony had taught her that every Ferrari had a soul, that you had to listen to the engine's breath to understand what it wanted. That afternoon, Sophie had followed a stray kitten that had slipped through the half-open door of the dealership. The animal, frightened by the noise and lights, had hidden under one of the displayed cars. Sophie, forgetting where she was, had entered to retrieve it. That's when Marcus noticed her. The girl was crouched next to a Ferrari F8 Tributo, trying to convince the kitten to come out of its hiding place. The sight of that dirty, barefoot little girl in his temple of luxury immediately annoyed him. Marcus saw the opportunity to make a power demonstration in front of everyone present. With a cruel smile, he raised his voice to get everyone's attention. The entire showroom fell silent as everyone turned toward the scene about to unfold. He approached the red Ferrari 488 Pista, his new $3 million acquisition, with the air of someone about to offer a memorable show. Journalists immediately raised their cameras, sensing something spectacular was about to happen. Marcus described the car with theatrical gestures. V8 twin-turbo engine with 720 horsepower, Formula One technology, 0 to 60 acceleration in 2.7 seconds. It was worth more than she could earn in 100 lifetimes. Then he made his cruel proposal. If the girl could start that Ferrari, he would give it to her. The laughter that erupted from the crowd was cruel and inhuman. The idea that a homeless child could even touch a Ferrari seemed the height of absurdity. Marcus swelled with pride at his own wit, convinced he had found the perfect way to demonstrate the unbridgeable distance between his world and the girl's. But what nobody knew was that Marcus had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Sophie looked at the man who thought he was humiliating her, then shifted her gaze to the red Ferrari. In that moment, a silent transformation occurred in her eyes. Sadness was replaced by something different, recognition, nostalgia, and a deep connection that went beyond the adult's understanding. She approached the car with slow but confident steps. People stepped aside, some still laughing, others beginning to sense that something strange was happening. Sophie gently placed her hand on the Ferrari's hood, as if greeting an old friend. She whispered something so low that only those very close could hear her. She spoke to the machine as if it were alive, as if it could understand her. The transformation in Sophie's behavior was evident to everyone. She walked around the car with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of what she was observing. She checked technical details, suspension setup, aerodynamic design, with the expertise of an experienced engineer. Marcus began to feel vague discomfort. He had hoped to see a frightened child who would walk away crying after understanding the impossibility of the task. Instead, Sophie behaved as if she knew exactly what she was doing. Marcus tried to stop her, saying she couldn't even open the door because the car had advanced security systems. But Sophie approached the driver's door, and instead of pulling the handle like anyone would, she placed her hand on a specific point of the frame and applied particular pressure. The door opened with a soft, precise sound. A murmur of surprise crossed the crowd. Marcus paled. That was a feature known only to Ferrari engineers and specialized technicians. Sophie climbed into the cockpit with fluid movements, despite her small stature. She settled into the driver's seat, adjusted the rearview mirrors with millimeter precision, checked the steering wheel position. Every gesture betrayed a familiarity that went beyond any rational explanation. Marcus approached nervously, ordering her to get down because she didn't even know where the ignition key was. Sophie smiled for the first time since entering the dealership. It was a sad smile, but full of wisdom that chilled Marcus's blood. She explained that there was no need for keys, that her father had taught her that every Ferrari had a heart, and she knew how to wake it up. Sophie placed both hands on the Ferrari 488 Pista's steering wheel, closed her eyes, and remained silent for seconds that seemed eternal. In the dealership showroom, 200 people held their breath, unable to understand what was happening. When she reopened her eyes, she began touching specific points on the dashboard in a sequence that seemed to follow logic known only to her. She wasn't pressing buttons randomly. Every movement was precise, calculated, as if she were playing a melody on an instrument she knew perfectly. She murmured something about how her father said every Ferrari was different, that they had different characters, different moods. You had to listen to what they wanted before waking them up. Marcus approached the car, his face increasingly pale. What he was seeing was impossible. The girl was activating systems that required access codes known only to top-level Ferrari technicians. Sophie pressed a combination of buttons on the steering wheel, held down the brake, and gently placed her right foot on the accelerator pedal. Then, with a movement that seemed like a caress, she touched the red start button. The result was both magical and terrifying. The twin-turbo V8 engine awakened with a deep roar that made the dealership windows tremble. It wasn't the harsh sound of a forced engine, but the perfect purr of a machine in harmony with its driver. The 720 horsepower manifested in a mechanical symphony that gave chills to every person present. But it wasn't over. Sophie began modulating the engine with imperceptible movements of her right foot, making the Ferrari sing like a Stradivarius violin. The sound changed tone, intensity, character, in a demonstration of control that left everyone speechless. Marcus staggered backward, unable to believe his own eyes. The girl hadn't just started the Ferrari, she had made it hers with a mastery that he, owner of 12 supercars, had never even imagined. The dealership director, James Morrison, approached the car with a shocked expression. He immediately recognized the technique the girl was using. It was identical to that of Tony Mitchell, the legendary engineer who had worked for Ferrari until his death. He whispered that it was impossible, that only Tony knew how to make engines sing like that, and he had died 3 years ago. Sophie turned off the engine and got out of the car with the same grace with which she had entered. The silence in the showroom was absolute. Nobody was laughing anymore. Nobody dared speak. The girl approached Marcus, who looked at her as if he had seen a ghost, and reminded him that the Ferrari was started. Had he kept his promise? Marcus stammered, asking who she really was. Sophie introduced herself with dignity that dramatically contrasted with her torn clothes. She was Sophie Mitchell, daughter of Tony Mitchell, who had dedicated his life to creating engines for Ferrari. He had died 3 years ago, along with her mother, in a car accident caused by a poorly marked construction site. The color completely disappeared from Marcus's face. Tony Mitchell had died in the accident caused by one of his construction sites, the one for which he had paid a negligible fine and covered up with the help of expensive lawyers. Sophie recounted that after the accident, nobody had taken care of her. Social services had placed her in an orphanage that closed after 6 months due to lack of funds. Since then, she had lived on the streets. James Morrison approached the girl with teary eyes, confirming that her father had been the best, that the Ferraris driving in Formula One today still had his improvements. He had been a genius. Marcus watched the scene, realizing that his cruel power demonstration had turned into a boomerang that was about to destroy him. The cameras kept rolling. Journalists frantically took notes. Sophie looked him straight in the eyes and asked if he would give her the Ferrari as promised. Marcus found himself facing the most difficult dilemma of his life. Hundreds of people and dozens of cameras had recorded his public promise. On the other hand, the prospect of having to give a $3 million Ferrari to a homeless girl who had just proven to be the daughter of the man who died because of him. The silence in the showroom had become oppressive.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
Everyone was waiting for his reaction, and Marcus knew that whatever he did would end up in newspapers around the world. James Morrison stepped forward, commenting that everyone had witnessed something extraordinary. That girl had not only started the Ferrari, but had demonstrated technical competence seen only in 3 people in 30 years of career. Marcus looked around desperately, seeking an escape route. He tried to minimize, saying it was just a joke, that the girl couldn't seriously expect a Ferrari. She was underage, didn't have a license, had nowhere to put it. A journalist from the Los Angeles Times who had recorded everything asked if he was saying he wouldn't keep the promise made in front of 200 witnesses and cameras. Marcus felt cold sweat running down his back. His reputation wouldn't survive another blow. But losing $3 million for a stupid bet seemed equally unacceptable. It was then that Sophie spoke again, with a maturity that left everyone speechless. She said she didn't want the Ferrari, that she had never wanted it. She had started it only to prove that money didn't make him better than her. Marcus looked at her confused. Sophie explained that he had humiliated a child in front of everyone to feel powerful, thinking that being rich gave him the right to hurt those who had less. But she knew who Marcus Wellington really was. The name pronounced with such determination made Marcus tremble. Sophie revealed that she knew the construction site where her parents died was his, that he had never paid for what he had done, that he had bribed inspectors to pass unsafe projects, that he had destroyed the neighborhood where they lived to build one of his skyscrapers. Marcus paled further. How did that child know all this? Sophie explained that she had spent 3 years on the streets, but also 3 years studying. In public libraries, on computers at social centers, she had learned everything about engines, engineering, but also about him. She knew that sooner or later they would meet. James Morrison asked what she really wanted. Sophie turned to him, explaining that she wanted what her father wanted, for Ferrari engines to continue making people dream. She wanted to learn, study, become an engineer like him. Marcus asked what she wanted from him. Sophie replied that she wanted him to pay for what he had done. Not with money, he already had that. She wanted him to pay by helping children like her, those who had lost everything because of the greed of people like him. When Marcus asked what would happen if he refused, Sophie pulled a small recording device from her pocket. She had recorded everything he had said, including confessions about corruption and unsafe construction sites. The journalists present would be very interested. Marcus realized that the girl had trapped him with a strategy worthy of an experienced adult. It hadn't been luck that made her start the Ferrari. It had been a calculated plan from the beginning. Sophie explained exactly what she wanted. For him to finance an engineering school for disadvantaged children, to build safe, affordable housing to replace what he had destroyed, and to help her study to become the engineer her father wanted her to become. In the weeks following what the media called the Ferrari miracle, Marcus's life changed radically. The event video had gone viral on all social networks, transforming the homeless girl into an international symbol of resilience and intelligence. Marcus found himself forced to keep the promises made in front of cameras, but what he didn't expect was how this constraint would transform into something profoundly different. The first week was media hell. Journalists from around the world wanted to interview him. Activists organized protests in front of his offices, and his investors began worrying about the company's image. But while he tried to limit damage to his reputation, something unexpected began happening. Sophie was temporarily placed with a foster family, but continued showing up at Marcus's offices every day after school. Not to torment him, but simply to learn. She asked sharp questions about how a construction company worked, why he had chosen to build skyscrapers instead of affordable housing, what the real costs of corruption were. At first, Marcus ignored her, hoping she would get tired. But Sophie was persistent, and her questions were increasingly penetrating. One day, while examining plans for a new residential complex, Sophie made an observation that hit Marcus like lightning. She noticed that the apartments were too small for a normal family, and the price was 3 times what a middle-class family could afford. He was building houses for the rich in a neighborhood where normal people lived. Marcus weakly replied that was how the real estate market worked. Sophie replied that it didn't have to work that way, that her father built engines that worked perfectly, not just engines that made a lot of money. The difference was that he thought about the people who would use what he created. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. For the first time in 20 years of career, he wondered if what he was doing was right. The turning point came when Sophie showed him calculations she had made on his projects. With the mathematical competence inherited from her engineer father, she had demonstrated that Marcus could earn equally by building larger apartments and selling them at more accessible prices if he gave up part of his profit margin. Sophie explained that he would earn 20% less, but would give homes to 3 times more families. And in the long run, he would have fewer legal problems and more respect. Marcus asked why he should give up money. Sophie replied that when you have everything, the most precious thing you can buy is self-respect. It was then that Marcus understood that the girl wasn't punishing him. She was saving him from himself. 5 years after the encounter at the Ferrari dealership, Marcus's life was unrecognizable. The arrogant billionaire who humiliated the poor for entertainment had become one of America's most respected entrepreneurs, a pioneer of sustainable social construction. The Tony and Sophie Mitchell Foundation, entirely funded by Marcus, had built 2,000 affordable apartments in 10 American cities. But the most ambitious project was the Los Angeles Academy of Social Engineering, a free school that trained young engineers with an ethical approach to technology. Sophie, now 15, was the Academy's brightest student. She had kept the promise made to herself to become an engineer like her father, but with an even broader vision. She studied civil, environmental, and social engineering, with the goal of creating technologies that truly improved people's lives. Marcus's transformation hadn't been painless. He had to fire corrupt consultants, give up unethical projects, face lawsuits for past damages. His wealth had reduced from $2 billion to $500 million, but he had discovered that the remaining money had completely different value. One Tuesday afternoon, exactly 5 years after the Ferrari incident, Marcus and Sophie found themselves in the same Rodeo Drive dealership. James Morrison welcomed them with the smile of someone seeing old friends. Sophie had just completed her diploma 3 years early, with perfect grades in all technical subjects. Marcus had insisted on giving her something special, the Ferrari 488 Pista that Sophie had started 5 years earlier. Marcus had bought it and kept it in his garage without ever driving it, waiting for this moment. He explained that it was still hers, that she had won it honestly 5 years ago. He had just waited until she was old enough to drive it. Sophie approached the car with the same reverence as 5 years before. She placed her hand on the hood and for a moment seemed to see her father's ghost beside her. She whispered that her father would be proud. Marcus replied that he was, and so was he. In the 5 years they had spent together, he had learned to see Sophie not as the girl who had humiliated him, but as the daughter he had never had. She had filled the void of his solitary life, teaching him that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in genuine human relationships. Sophie got in the car and started the engine with the same mastery as 5 years before. The Ferrari's roar resonated in the dealership, but this time there was no tension in the air. Only joy, pride, and the satisfaction of a circle closing in the best possible way. Marcus asked where she wanted to go. Sophie replied to the cemetery to let her parents hear the sound of the Ferrari she had won. During the drive through Los Angeles, Marcus looked at the city with different eyes. He recognized the neighborhoods where he had built affordable housing, saw construction sites for new social projects, noticed young people leaving the academy with books under their arms and dreams in their eyes. Sophie commented that 5 years ago he had saved her life, even if he didn't know it. Marcus looked at her surprised. She explained that his humiliation had given her the opportunity to prove who she really was. If she had remained an invisible child on the streets, nobody would have ever known she existed. His cruelty had given her a platform to show the world that even a homeless child could have talent and dignity. Marcus reflected that she had also saved him from himself. Sophie agreed. They were two people broken in different ways. He had everything but wasn't happy. She had nothing but had dreams. Together, they had found balance. They arrived at the cemetery where Tony and Maria Mitchell rested. Sophie turned off the engine and remained silent for several minutes, her hand resting on the steering wheel. She whispered to her parents that she had kept her promise, had become an engineer, and had also saved a soul along the way. Marcus felt tears burning his eyes. In 5 years, that girl had taught him more than he had learned in 40 years of life. When they returned to the city, evening was falling over Los Angeles. Sophie asked if he had ever regretted meeting her. Marcus replied without hesitation that it had been the best thing that ever happened to him, even though it had cost him $1.5 billion. Especially because of that, It had taught him that money spent well is worth much more than money piled up in banks. That evening, while Sophie studied in the house Marcus had given her, he sat in his office looking at the city. On the wall hung 2 photos. One showed him on the day of humiliation at Ferrari, arrogant and cruel. The other showed him at the inauguration of the latest affordable housing complex, surrounded by happy families and smiling children. The difference wasn't just in appearance, it was in the soul. A journalist called for an interview on the 5th anniversary of the Ferrari miracle. Marcus accepted, as he always did when it came to promoting social projects. When asked what was the most important lesson he had learned, Marcus looked through the window toward the academy, where lights were still on and young people studied to change the world. He replied that sometimes it takes a 10-year-old girl to teach a 40-year-old adult what it means to be human, and that true wealth isn't measured by what you own, but by what you're willing to give. The story of Marcus and Sophie became legend in engineering and social entrepreneurship circles. Not for the technical miracle, but for the human miracle. The demonstration that it's always possible to change, grow, become better. And every time a Ferrari raced through Los Angeles streets, someone remembered the girl who had taught an arrogant billionaire that true speed isn't measured in miles per hour, but in the ability to race towards something truly worth reaching. Like, if you believe even the hardest hearts can change, comment telling if you've ever seen someone completely transform. Share to honor those who never give up despite difficulties. Subscribe for more stories of redemption and second chances. Sometimes it takes a child to teach an adult what it means to be human. Sometimes true wealth is only discovered when you're willing to lose it. And sometimes a Ferrari is enough to ignite something much more precious, the heart.